cher Carlos, un très grand merci de m'avoir invité à cette fête, parce qu'un anniversaire, c'est une fête. Je le dis comme je le ressens, parce que même si c'est une connotation...
So I say this, although I'm being a bit nostalgic, I have a great pleasure of finding myself between you, because 40 years of UGT for me it reminds me the first visit in UGT at the time. And I was, in fact, a trade unionist in Belgium. So the president of the working group, I see it every week, and I see her every day. And Guy Ryder, an old friend, in fact, he's, well, I don't see him quite often ever since we... And Joao, my dear Conrad, it's a long time that I haven't seen him. Well, in fact, it's a great pleasure that I'm here with you.
Je pourrais vous dire simplement...
I can simply tell you that I fully subscribe to João Proença's conclusion about our expectations of Europe. And I also agree with everything that Jean Lapère said. But allow me to also share some views with you. When João said that I was very demanding in the negotiations, this was when we were holding discussions among friends. The story about the clauses, and those were paramount at the time, but we held in-depth discussions, and when we arrived at the conclusions, with a few exceptions, right, João, we all arrived at a conclusion. In other words, we defended our views with the European institutions and with the national institutions. But time has gone by, and in our meeting, I need to evoke here this union, this community. As a representative of workers and as representative of the European Economic Social Committee, I was often invited by young people, and they always told me things are going very badly for us. And I would tell them, and I still tell them, I am not saying that things are good for young people in Europe today, but I can tell you that when I was young, things were 100 times worse. And I'm not lying. This union, our union began, the history of our union began after the Second World War. And I was lucky enough to have talked to unionists who had gone through one or even two wars. So I listened to them, to their experiences. They were Belgian, French, and German, and even our Spanish and Portuguese comrades before they joined the European Union. These unionists were deeply convinced that we had to build a European Union. And the reason? Peace. Peace is paramount. I don't know if you understand this. I would like to insist on this. In these last 3 years, I have highlighted and underscored this because I feel that we live in a situation of pre-war times. And I should say that I don't know war. I'm not old enough to have gone through the Second World War, but when I look at what is going on in some countries, I'm worried. I am worried because I feel that these are circumstances that are very similar to those that preceded the Second World War. In the Treaty of Rome and in the following years, most citizens of the European community, the 6 first members, and then we had 10 member states, we moved on to 12, and let me stop here. Those 12 adhered profoundly to the project of European integration. I have highlighted here one of the reasons, peace, but for us, from Greece and you from Portugal and Spain, we joined the European community in 81, Portugal and Spain in 86. Freedom was also one of the reasons for joining the European community. We did not have that freedom. In our democracies, we wanted to elect our representatives in the European institutions. And simultaneously, most citizens of the 12 member countries and afterwards of the 15 member countries was to adhere to a project for other reasons. This union has always defended, sometimes more, sometimes less, currently a little less than more. It has always defended economic and social cohesion. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was not exactly a social treaty, but there were already 2 aspects of that treaty that what I often quote is a quote from the foreword. What these countries seek, these communities seek, is cohesion in progress. And I often quote the sentence because I want to raise the awareness of those people, want to lower the level of living. Because the purpose, the aim of the European Union is to raise the quality of life of our citizens who have low living standards. The Treaty of Rome, after the Treaty of Rome, the social fund, the European Social Fund, was created. At the beginning, the aim of it was to promote employment. But then Jacques Delors gave baby steps at the social level, but only baby steps. And then during the Jacques Delors presidency, for several years, social progress was impressive. It was not easy. João and Jean have already highlighted these aspects, but allow me to just weave some reflections here. After the presidency of Jacques Delors, we have not been able to negotiate true agreements, what we used to call interprofessional conventions, European interprofessional conventions. The agreements mentioned parental leave, part-time work, all of that resulted from former European conventions. And why don't we have them anymore? In Greece, we have a saying, we say, I don't want to bless my own food. What I mean by this is that we unionists are always also targeted. At the time, the European Union, what it defended was this way of working at the European level was unique. The system of having a community where everyone is heard in the decision-making process. There was an instance that had two purposes. The European Commission that could propose mandatory measures, so European laws, in other words. And the Council of Ministers would make these decisions. And they decided on a proposal made by the European Commission. And it was thanks to this that the European community survived. There were other communities, the Warsaw Pact, for example, that were created and ended. What did Jacques Delors do that was very useful? He did not force employers to negotiate with us. No, he simply played his role of European body that proposes draft laws. So draft laws being proposed by the European Commission regarding parental leave as well. And thanks to the Maastricht Treaty, one of the social partners became legislators. So what it said was, dear friends, employers, workers, you must propose we are proposing here a binding rule, in other words, a law which you can negotiate and give your opinions and make your proposals. We should not underestimate none of this. These were very important tools for trade unions. Business Europe today said at the time, we want to negotiate because with this commission we all have a proposal that will be closer to trade union interests. But we were not able to negotiate. Elena André is still very young, but we have known each other for almost 3 decades, and we work together in the social dialogue. And so many workers sometimes were so arrogant that I had to leave the room so that I wasn't rude to them. After the crisis in 2008, the situation became catastrophic, as was mentioned here. Citizens who were mostly in favor of European integration for the reasons I mentioned earlier. We now see that at least the European population that still believes in the monetary union. But this is no longer clear. And we must ask why. Why is this? Now, moving on to Brexit. The British, and I say this with a lot of respect for them. I do respect the British people. I can't forget that they fought against fascism before the war even. But ever since their membership to the European Commission, they have always tried to restrict the process of European integration. All British leaders without exception. There was a meeting in the United Kingdom, and all politicians were telling citizens, we need to leave the union because things will be better. Or otherwise, they would say, if things are not right in the UK, it is Europe's fault. It is the European Union's fault. So this propaganda worked. And then we saw that they were lying. And in the end, all of the supporters of Brexit resigned, and we realized that they were all lies. They were saying £3 million are paid every week to the social security system. All of that was false. They were saying that we pay too much to the European Union. But the truth is that the fact that they belong to the European Union was an advantage for the British people. So this propaganda, which was a lie, convinced most British people to vote pro-Brexit. And now we don't even know how things will work out. Maybe if they held a second referendum, which they won't, perhaps now we would have different results. Because all of these liars did not think that maybe it was due to the European community that there was peace in Ireland. Ireland was divided in two with armed factions on both sides, but thanks to the European Union, they signed the peace treaty. And now with Brexit, well, at the EESC, we have a working group to plead towards the unity of Ireland. But there's something worse even. Mr. Salvini and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy have said that if the Geneva Bridge fell, it is European Union's fault. This is unbelievable to listen to a politician, a European politician, say such a thing. And even with regards to immigrants. Italy was for many decades the first #1 exporter of labor to Belgium, to France, and even to Great Britain. You'll find in these countries politicians who are have Italian blood. And Salvini and his party for many years had a racist behavior, not only vis-à-vis foreigners, but also in relation to Italians from the south of the country who migrated from Sicily, for example, to the mainland to work in the Italian industry. So it's sad to listen to people like Salvini, who increasingly have this hate discourse. And why is this? Well, I'm not sure about the answer, but I believe that people are dumb enough to believe in such dumb speeches. People who say that Italians first, Italians must come first. And look at what is happening in Germany. Germany is the first country contributing to the EU budget, and fortunately so. But it is also the country that has benefited the most. And this is what the numbers tell us. I would never have voted in Mrs. Merkel, but I should confess that her policy, her immigration policy, and I must be very open about this, she was the only lady politician that acted appropriately in terms of immigration policy. And now she is paying the price because there are growing racist and xenophobe speeches. And picking up on what I said earlier, these populist politicians, unfortunately, Portugal doesn't have populist politicians, fortunately. But Greece lost a large part of its population because of fascist politicians. And then we have Ms. Le Pen in France, Salvini in Italy, Lamberlang in Belgium. They have found a common enemy: foreigners, immigrants. So let's imagine that they come to power. I'm afraid that their enemies will no longer be the immigrant or the foreigner. It will be the immigrant in the middle of the country, in the hinterland, or in the neighboring country. But should we continue with these pessimistic speeches? No, I'm an optimist. But I must say that if we came to this, it was because there was not political will in the European institutions, the Council and the Parliament in first place, and also the European Parliament. They did not have the courage for many years to pronounce or denounce and implement measures, specific measures that would ensure a dignifying, measures that would dignify the lives of European citizens. But it's not too late, and President Juncker has already started with very good intentions. In this last years, some new jobs have been created thanks to different programs, the Juncker program. But it is also true that the poverty rate is still very high. It has not dropped, and in some countries it has even increased. At the European Economic and Social Committee, we have always tried to do things, concrete actions. At the time with my rapporteur, we presented very concrete measures. In 1989, we proposed the Fundamental Social Rights Charter. So we have always tried to propose concrete measures to act against raising poverty numbers. Some years ago, we proposed the introduction of the minimum guaranteed European minimum wage. We submitted our proposal. And now we are faced with a sad situation. A minimum wage is what we wanted to guarantee. We want to ensure that nobody dies of hunger or of cold. But the representatives of the workers, and I couldn't help realize this, and they are not only workers, there are sometimes jurists and other professionals who represent workers who are against this measure. But let me repeat, I cannot conceive that representatives of workers from countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, or Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Estonia, I can't understand how they can be against such measures. I can't understand that workers can be against a measure like this one. But this is proof that mentalities have changed. And they don't realize that a unified Europe cannot exist if millions of people live in extreme poverty. Our society has progressed over these last 70 years, sometimes more, sometimes less, to ensure, guarantee the well-being of its citizens. However, if tomorrow, after the elections, the European Union ceases to exist, it will lose all credibility. By electing populist parties to the European institutions. And they're all become worried for my children, not for me, but for my children. And for that reason, I think that young people should join hands to defend what is essential: living conditions, working conditions, and in particular peace in Europe. Because without peace, we cannot ensure social progress and progress itself. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.